What is up, watch fam? I am Christian, the curator of the Theo and Harris Watch Shop, and today I'm going to be talking about the top 4 Rolexes under $10,000. Boom, watch fam. All right, before we get into 4 Rolexes under $10,000, let's do a quick wristwatch check. I am wearing a Rolex that is unfortunately not under $10,000. Also not for sale, so I guess the point is moot. This is my father's, actually, Datejust, reference 1601, wide boy, champagne on champagne. This is like the 80s watch that he always kind of wanted when he was in college but could never afford, and then my mom ended up giving it to him years later for a 50th birthday. So really cool, kind of nostalgic. I don't know if he loves the watch as much as he loves how much it represents and all that. So anyway, I wear it a ton as well. So Rolex is, for most people, the grail, right? While there are better watches, and most people that read about watches are aware of this, you have mainstream brands like Patek Philippe, Lange & Söhne, Vacheron Constantin, watch brands that produce things that are more complicated and finished to a higher level than Rolex. Rolex and these brands don't have the same goals, right? This is just a hot horology, right? But Rolex still remains, while technically maybe inferior to those brands in many ways, still remains the grail for most of the world. I heard someone once say, a Rolex is the only watch in the world that you can trade for water, or likewise a plane ticket home. Rolex is currency, completely globally recognized. There is no language barrier for this brand, but they are pretty expensive. I heard once from a Rolex sales rep that the average Rolex sale is around $12,500. So Rolex, rightfully so, definitely has an unapproachable aura. But today's episode is going to be talking about, really, in the grand scheme, how approachable many fantastic Rolexes can be, well under $12,500. Actually, we're going to start all the way down around $3,000 and work our way up close to our mark there at 10. So let's start off with a watch that I think is, the bedrock of the Theo and Harris brand, really. Specifically, the 4-digit Datejust, namely 1600, 1601, 1603, 1625. These were early Datejusts before the introduction of the quickset date. But these Datejusts are fantastic, and between $3,000 and $5,000, depending on certain variables like condition, dial color, or material. Now, while $3,000 and $5,000 still is certainly a lot of money, it is really on the most approachable end of the Rolex spectrum. But here's what's beautiful about this. These Datejusts, some of the most approachable Rolexes on the market, are actually, in my opinion, some of the most beautiful and interesting, not to mention versatile. A Datejust 1601 was my first Rolex, and now, in retrospect, after having owned and sold hundreds, maybe even at this point thousands, I have absolutely no regrets. Every time that I sell a 1601 or 1603 or 1600, I am so happy that someone has made such a fantastic decision that also happens to be a fraction of the cost of more popular models, like the Submariner. So, real quick through the specs. 36mm Oyster cases. The bezels are either smooth in the 1600, fluted in the 1601, engine turned in the 1603, a little bit of a sportier look, or in the 1625 reference, Thunderbird, which actually comes with a rotating bezel. Great watch, fantastic history. We actually just sold a great version of one of those watches last week. The Datejust is, while not the most popular Rolex of the entire collection, really a significant one historically. It was introduced in 1945 to celebrate Rolex's 40th anniversary. Now today, and I say this all the time, we see brands introduce a new color to celebrate an anniversary, but in 1945, Rolex celebrated with a completely new watch that would go on to become one of the most, iconic and important and useful watches of all time, which I think is pretty damn impressive, sets the bar pretty high. Long story short, the Datejust is, while the most approachable watch we're talking about today, still my absolute favorite. Now, moving on to the next watch. Now this is a modern watch. This is Rolex's Oyster Perpetual, specifically the 39mm size. I absolutely love this watch. I love the case, I love the bracelet, I love the multitude of color variations now. Maybe their white dial, which again is so kind of plain Jane in a way, is still so goddamn clean and beautiful. $5,700 retail. And while again, it lives maybe in the shadows of the GMT and the Submariner, much more famous and popular watches, I think that this watch is maybe even a better option, especially for the person that's looking for a Rolex that they can wear in the widest context. This watch, while certainly, sporty, has the case and the bracelet and everything, still has a richness and kind of an elegance that the Submariner and the Yachtmasters just don't. Oyster Perpetuals are, and basically have always been, the most bare bones Rolexes. Yes, you are going without the date, but let's be frank here, at least for me, my date is on my phone. I'm just being honest, and it's maybe sacrilege for a watch geek to say. My time's always right, my date is usually wrong. But these watches are made to an equal level of quality. They're held to the same exact standards. I could not recommend this watch to you folks more. And again, it's funny, $5,700 is what I said before compared to the $12,500, quite approachable in the grand scheme. And yet I recommend this watch so much, not just because of its affordable price point, but genuinely the watch at its own merit in itself. And I think that's a great testament. Now, the next watch, we are going to go a little bit back here. The Datejust. The Datejust was introduced in 1956. The Datejust has become, I would say, the most iconic watch maybe of all time. The Datejust is the watch of the greener grass. The Datejust is the watch of leaders, of important people. Of course, a Datejust does not make someone a leader or an important person, but that is certainly the image that is associated with this watch. Of course, because of all the marketing that Rolex has dedicated to that association over the last 60 years, but nonetheless, I adore the Datejust. Today, of course, it is still in production. The Datejust is not just still in the Rolex catalog, but still remains the watch that, when people do pass by a Rolex boutique, it's like, wow, that is a very serious thing. But those Datejust, which come in 36 millimeters and 40 millimeters, are above our $10,000 price ceiling. They're $33,000 and $36,000 respectively. But if you go into the vintage world, go back into the 70s and 80s, some fantastic watches, just as beautiful and in many cases even more beautiful than the Datejusts that are currently for sale at Rolex. You can snag one between really $6,500 and $12,000, depending on a couple of variables, of course, including condition, dial color, a metal bracelet or no bracelet, style of bracelet, things like that. But $6,000 and let's say $12,500, which is a pretty wide range, but you can get yourself into one of the most, historically important, culturally important, beautiful, and really even historically functional. It was the first watch to ever feature the day in full text, which is funny. Now we take that for granted. Now we're focused on, tourbillons and minute repeaters. But at one point, the day was like the thing. Again, at a small fraction of the current retail price for the Datejust. This looks like a Datejust. This is actually a Datejust, but usually that presidential style bracelet jumps out to the public and to yourself the quickest. Of course, it's a lot of money. I'm not pretending that it's not. But if you ever have the opportunity to even just try on a Datejust, not to own it, just to try it on, it really is an experience. Whether you like it or not, that's up to you. But I really suggest, even if you own better watches, try it on. It really is very fun. One of my favorite watches of all time is Lang & Söhne's 1815 chronograph, a watch that's around $40,000. I'd really like to buy one. And that really is an example of kind of my more kind of intellectual watch taste, really more complicated and technically impressive. But I can't say that I love that watch any more than I love a 1980s yellow gold or white gold Datejust. It's different. It just hits your heart differently. So next watch, and actually last watch, and yes, we are going to stay modern, and this watch is, or it might be a little bit tough for most people to get. This is Rolex's GMT-Master Pepsi. The retail on the Pepsi is $9,700. On the secondhand market, they're trading between like $14,000 and $18,000. So quite a significant premium if you want to jump the line and own the watch. Putting all that hype aside, this truly is a beautiful watch. The GMT was introduced by Rolex in 1954 in the reference 6542 classic watch. It was the watch that was worn by Pussy Galore on the airplane, actually. The GMT was conceived by Rolex in collaboration with Pan Am, actually, when the two decided that the world needed needed this complication that could display multiple time zones. So the GMT, the Greenwich Mean Time complication, was born. I explained all of this and how important it was in the 20th century in another video that I highly recommend you watch after this. It's really good. You have to watch it. Anna did an incredible job. If you love Anna, watch the video. While the GMT model has remained a constant in the Rolex catalog since its introduction back in '54, its most classic and lovable configuration, which is this blue and red Pepsi configuration, disappeared from the Rolex catalog in the mid-2000s. I believe 2006 or 2007, and it wasn't until 2018. Mind you, everyone's been begging for this since it was discontinued, but in 2018, Rolex finally re-released it with a ceramic bezel and a beautiful Jubilee bracelet. Again, overhyped, maybe people think it's better than it is, but the fact is, it's still such an incredibly good watch. That's what a boring way to describe something, but everything about it is reliable, attractive, significant. The technological advancements that Rolex continuously devotes resources to are amazing, whether that's their hairspring or different materials, whether that's their metals. Again, the GMT and the Submariner and all these watches, the Daytona, people would murder for them. Are these watches worth murdering for? Maybe not, probably not, I would go so far as to say, but they still are fantastic. And Rolex's retail price, $9,700, if you can get one, is extremely fair, in my opinion. So while the average Rolex sale price might be $12,500, and certainly we know plenty of people that would spend $50,000 and $80,000 and $100,000 on Rolexes, there's still plenty to own under 10 grand. And I'm glad I went through that with you guys today. If you liked this video, go ahead and like it. And more importantly than that, go ahead and comment down below. And if you're interested in the GMT complication, watch the video, which is up next. Fantastic deep dive into Grand Seiko's GMT. Grand Seiko, not Rolex, very different brand, but uniquely fantastic. So go ahead and watch that video.